to record. Okay, well, hello everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to today's meeting of Gedling Borough Council Planning Committee. My name is Councillor John Truscott. I am chair of the committee. As it says on page 2 of your agenda papers, this meeting is being live streamed using the cameras that you'll see around the council chamber, and it will be recorded and subsequently available on the council's website. I'd like to introduce some of the officers at the top table here who will be helping us with the meeting. On my left, I have Mike Avery, Head of Development and Place, and to his left is Nigel Bryan, a Principal Planning Officer. To my right, from our legal department, is Sarah Fayez, a solicitor. And to her right is Kate Goodall from the Democratic Services Officer, who is also clerk to the committee. Now, I'll have just a word about face masks. I know that after the government says that they are relaxing the rules on wearing face masks, and so there is no obligation to wear them. I would hope that most people would choose to wear them rather than having to be obligated. And if not for their own sake, for the sake of others who might be more susceptible to this virus. And we well know from the reports that Nottingham in particular is a hotspot with very high levels of infection. If you see that I'm not wearing one at the moment, that is because obviously I'm having to speak, and also I'm having to read my notes, and I find that the mask makes my glasses mist up and I can't read what's in front of me. So, but I hope most people will take the opportunity to wear their masks whenever possible. Right, if we can start with item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies for absence and substitutions. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. All present and correct. But I'd also just like to add, I'm sure I'll speak for the whole committee when I say how pleased we are to see you back in the chair today.
Oh, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. And because of my absence, if I'm a bit rusty at chairing, I hope you'll please forgive me. Councillor Adams.
Well, we're all present and correct, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Second item on the agenda is to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of June 2021, which you'll find on page 5 to page 20 of your agenda papers. Can somebody move as a correct record?
Move.
Thank you. And second? Thank you. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. And against and abstentions? Thank you. That is carried. Planning Committee Protocol, which you'll find on pages 21 to 23 of your agenda papers. Item 3 on the agenda is Declaration of Interest. I will declare a collective non-pecuniary interest on item number 7, number 19 Ash Close, because the site is owned by the council. Does anybody have any individual declarations of interest to make? Nope. Okay. Let's get straight on then with item 4 on the agenda, which is application number 2021/0409, Red Hill Pavilion, Thornton Avenue, Red Hill, which you'll find on page 39 of your agenda papers. And we have we would have had a speaker, Philippa Fisher, who is a resident objector, but unfortunately she's having to self-isolate because of COVID, and her contribution will be read by Kate Goodall. Thank you very much.
Point 7.45 of the planning report identifies that Thornton Avenue is a highway which serves Hammond's Farm and that the width of the carriageway is between 4.6 and 4.8 metres. It is therefore inevitable that the large farm traffic is forced to mount and drive along the pavements to avoid any oncoming traffic, pavements that the nursery patrons will be expected to walk. Point 7.33 states that the nursery will generate 200 extra car movements, which will force further vehicles to mount the pavement. All agencies have been provided with evidence of vehicles frequently driving along the pavements at the current traffic levels. It is inevitable that the traffic and footfall increase will significantly increase the possibility of there being a reasonably foreseeable pedestrian accident. Note point 6.4 policy LPD 61, I would suggest that this development will have a detrimental effect on highway safety and the access needs of all people. The planning report has recommended that the council refuse this application due to the unavoidable destruction this development will have on our green belt. The 443 square metre car park, 293 square metres hard surface footpath, metal gates and 2.4 metre high metal fencing will undoubtedly be a damaging and detrimental addition to our green belt. Point 7.5 to 7.15 to 7.16 states this development would be harmful to our green belt and would go against the aims of the National Green Belt policy. The footpath exists into the new proposed car park, which is exceptionally dangerous considering the age of the patrons. The footpath exists at Thornton Avenue directly into the path of a driveway. Within the previous plans and verbally during the previous committee meeting, the owner identified and gave great emphasis to the need for disabled parking based on the safety of children within their care. They have now retracted this, which is contrary to the Equality Act 2010.
Thank you. I'll now ask Mike Avery to introduce and elaborate on this particular item.
Thank you, Chairman. Planning permission is sought for the change of use of the building to a day nursery, along with the erection of extensions, the creation of a car park, fencing, and a crushed stone pedestrian access path running along the side of the bridleway from Thornton Avenue to the proposed facility. Paragraph 3.1 of the report refers to a change of use of the surrounding agricultural land to create a car park. This is no longer proposed and is subsequently clarified at paragraph 7.2. 22 letters of objection have been received, raising concerns in relation to highway safety, the impact upon the greenbelt, and other matters. These representations are summarised in the officer report. A previous scheme was refused permission by the committee at the meeting held in October last year due to the impact which the development would have upon the openness of the green belt, 1.5 metres, and its relocation to behind the existing hedgerow. The siting of the 2.4 metre high palisade fencing behind the existing hedgerow. The proposal would bring back into use a redundant building which, in principle, is considered to be an appropriate form of development, having regard to paragraph 146 of the MPPF and policy 12 of the local planning document. Paragraph 146 of the MPPF does, however, caveat this acceptability by stating that this form of development is considered to be appropriate, providing it preserves the openness of the green belt. As such, whilst the principle of the change of use of the building is considered to be appropriate development within the green belt, the associated works and development proposed to facilitate the change of use need to be assessed in terms of the impact upon the openness of the green belt. The layout and scale of the proposed extensions is considered to be policy compliant, and I consider this to be appropriate within the green belt. Turning next to the proposed change of use of the agricultural land to facilitate pedestrian access. This would, in my view, alter the appearance of the land within the green belt, creating a considerable length of hard surfacing bound by knee-high fencing to the field boundary. In terms of the proposed car park, whilst it will be located within the extent of the site to the front of the building, it would introduce approximately 293 square metres of hard surfacing, which would further urbanise the appearance of the site. Taking into account the footpath and the car park, the overall level of hard landscaping works would equate to 443 square metres to the detriment of the green belt. This will be further compounded by the proposed 2.4 metre high palisade fencing. The development, because of its inappropriateness, would, by definition, be harmful to the green belt, and I'm of the view that the substantial weight should be given to that harm. Whilst there's some merit in bringing the building back into use, I do not consider that the benefits of the scheme outweigh the harm. The creation of the car park would also result in the loss of a mature oak tree, which would further erode the character and appearance of the area. Further to the publication of the report, a provisional tree preservation order has now been made to protect the group of trees situated to the front of the site, following consultation with the chairman of the Planning Committee. Significant concerns have been raised by members of the public in relation to highway safety impacts. The Highways Authority have considered the access arrangements and level of car parking provision and raised no objection. I do not, therefore, consider that a reason for refusal on highway grounds could therefore be supported. Chairman, I recommend that the proposal is refused permission in accordance with the officer report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So there we have it on page 26 of your agenda papers. Application number 2021/0409, Red Hill Pavilion, Thorntons Avenue, conversion and alteration of pavilion building for use as a children's day nursery, with all the rest of the details there. Would anybody like to move that application? Okay, thank you. And second? Okay, thank you. Seconded. Would anybody like to open the debates? Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think the officers are dead right. I've known this area for the best part of my life, all my life. And Tommy Hammond's, what it is now, it's a bigger company than it was 20 years ago. And there's a massive amount of traffic goes up there, big lorries, real big, I don't know, the big, massive lorries. Really, really big. And they're doing 2 or 3 times a day, and I think it's too dangerous to put traffic up there on that. Mansfield Road at the moment is very busy now. It's the 30 mile an hour, and we've got traffic work going on a bit up on Mansfield Road. And in all fairness, I think it's an absolutely crying shame that we've got to think about putting some business on there which is going to make it awful for those people who live there. And I think the officers are right. This is a really, really bad decision. So I'm hoping that the recommendation is carried. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Paling.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very torn over this application because whilst I agree with Councillor Barnes about the road and the amount of traffic on it, Highways have not objected. And I personally don't have any objection to the development section of the Greenbelt. So I almost am forced into a position of voting for it. But I just wish Highways had actually recognised the potential dangers, because then I would be quite clear that I could vote against, well, for the motion and refuse planning permission. But at the moment, as I say, I'm torn.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's disappointing that Highways have not chose to object to it. So obviously we can't, as Mr. Avery has quite correctly said, we're not being asked to decide this application on highway grounds. It's also disappointing, I think, that this would be an ideal use for a redundant eyesore building. However, I'm quite happy to, well, I'm content to vote for this recommendation on the grounds that are clearly stated out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to make a contribution? Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a fair degree of sympathy with the application, and certainly in terms of the development of the building itself, I have no objection and will be supportive of that. It's what comes with it that, unfortunately, that causes the problems. As others have rightly said, we're not able to object on highway grounds. It's a bit of a mystery as to why highways haven't objected, but they haven't, so that wouldn't be a valid ground to object to this application. But I think the officers have provided a compelling case in terms of the detriment to the green belt, and on that basis, and the fact that there is a tree protection order in place protecting the what a group of trees of substantial merit, and on those grounds, I'm minded to support the recommendation to refuse this application.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barnfather.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. At risk of being repetitive, I concur with much of what has been said by Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Wilkinson. It's unfortunate that county highways have not recognised the potential impact on pedestrians, on residents and on other vehicular traffic. It would have certainly strengthened the argument for refusal. But I think that the argument in terms of the impact on the openness of the green belt is sufficient in itself, but it would have been obviously much more helpful for officers should there be an appeal against this decision at a later date. But I'm more than happy to support the recommendation that's before us today to refuse the application.
Thank you very much. Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, my issue comes back to this palisade fence again. I mean, I think we discussed this in the, I know this is a new application, but I know the fencing was an issue because, again, its location, even though it's been located behind a hedge, the hedge disappears. That's still affecting the visual amenity of that area and effectively, therefore, improper development. The access track, again, like it's been raised many times, is definitely problematic. I'm happy to hear we've TPO'd those trees because, you know, when we identify something like that, speed is absolutely paramount, and so I congratulate you on managing to get that in place in time. Yeah, it's. Can I just confirm the point about the disabled parking spaces that Kate mentioned, please? Because I sort of heard it, but am I right in saying they've removed the disabled parking spaces from the parking development? Is that what you said? And therefore was in contravention of the Disabilities Act? Is that as I heard it right?
Mr. Bryan, could you zoom in on that plan, please, so we can see if the car parking spaces are annotated? So it doesn't look like the car parking spaces are annotated, but the overall provision is acceptable.
Thank you very much. But yes, I will be wholeheartedly supporting the recommendation to refuse planning permission on all the other grounds stated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to contribute to the debate? Nope. So you're all content that I move to the vote? Yep. So we have the application 2021/0409 Red Hill Pavilion conversion and alteration of pavilion building. You will find the recommendation on page 39 of your agenda papers that the Borough Council refuses planning permission for the grounds listed on page 40. So if you're voting in favour of this, you're voting to refuse the application. Is everyone clear of that? Okay, all those in favour of the recommendation on page 39 that planning permission is refused, please show. And against? And abstentions? Thank you, that has been carried, i.e. permission has been refused. Okay, if we can move on to item 5 of the agenda, application number 2021/0301, Hillside Farm, Orchard Close, Burton Joyce, which you'll find on page 42 of your agenda papers. Erection of 14 dwellings, reserve matters approval, appearance, landscape and layout and scale. Bearing in mind that outline panelling permission has already been agreed on application 2018/1034. So we have a speaker on this, Mr. Callum Bott, who is a resident objector. If you'd like to come up to the lectern, please. And you have 3 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to come and speak on behalf of the residents who have showed concerns about the development in question. I personally, as someone within the industry, have several concerns with regards to the current proposal on Hillside Farm, of which I've summarised some of the most troubling. It says within the planning report that the Burton Joyce Neighbourhood Plan is appropriate to policy MP4, which states that proposals of 1 to 3 bed dwellings and meet the accessibility set out in approved document M, volume 1. Given that the maximum steepness of the site is to be proposed at 1 in 12, which has not been illustrated anywhere to demonstrate if this can actually be achieved, approved document M states that accessibility should be between 1 in 20 and 1 in 12. The proposal is at the higher limit of this, and given the proximity of the site is to the village high street and the potential accessibility issues of the site, I feel this is a concern which rules out a market which is trying to be addressed within the plan. The Village Neighbourhood Plan, Gedling Borough Council Local Plan and a Housing Needs Study all state that 1 to 3 bedroom dwellings are required. At present, only 43% of the development is of a smaller scale dwellings and is either 2 or 3 bed dwelling. This means that 57%, the majority of the proposal are either 4 or 5 bed dwellings and not appropriate to all the studies and plans currently in place. Table 6.1 within the Burton Joyce Village Neighbourhood Plan says that development should enhance or complement the location, respect the established patterns of design, materials, form, scale, size and massing. The application in its current form, which are all 2-storey dwellings bar 1, does not tie into the design, form, size, massing of the surrounding context. Olive Grove, which runs parallel to the site, and Orchard Close, which will lead directly onto the site, are either dormer or normal bungalows. There is currently one dormer bungalow within the proposal, and it is actually taller than some of the proposed 2-storey dwellings. This is not complementary to the surrounding context. Furthermore, as a side note, several of the elevation drawings issued on the planning portal do not align to the levels and dimensions shown. One in particular has a level which states just over 8 metres, and the dimensions showing the height against this elevation add up to almost 8.8. That's almost 800 mil higher than the levels indicated. Is this itself not questionable that the scheme appears to be rushed and not thought out properly? As I've previously said in my objection letters, if the scheme being proposed were more in keeping with the existing direct context of the surrounding roads to complement and sensitively address the existing context, then this would be a very different kettle of fish. Thank you for listening and taking my concerns into account.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'd now like to ask Nigel Bryan, Principal Planning Officer, to outline this and elaborate on the application further.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for the erection of 14 dwellings made pursuant to Outline Permission 2018-1034. Matters under consideration as part of the Reserved Matters application are appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. The access from Orchard Close has already been approved. The housing mix would be 2 two-bedroom properties, 4 three-bedroom properties, 6 four-bedroom properties and 2 five-bed. This is considered to be a suitable housing mix. They'll be based around 2 areas of public open space which would be overlooked by the proposed dwellings. And the open space is shown as light green on the drawing in front of you. The majority of units would have back gardens adjacent to existing properties on Olive Grove. There is quite a significant change in levels through the application site, with the units stepped heading up the hill to utilise, where possible, the natural contours of the land. In respect to window-to-window distances, there will be a gap of between 23 and 27 metres between the properties proposed and those on Olive Grove, which is considered to be acceptable in terms of overlooking and overbearing impacts. Parking provision is acceptable and the house types proposed would respect the character of the area. Existing green boundary treatments are to be retained and additional landscaping proposed in the public open space. In respect of drainage, surface water is intended to be stored in underground chambers before being released at specific rates to the existing network, with final details to be approved through a discharge of condition application. And that will be alongside consultation of the lead flood authority. In accordance with the officer report, it's recommended the application be granted Reserved Matters approval, subject to conditions as outlined on pages 50 to 53 of the committee report. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Right, there you have it. The proposal on page 42, Hillside Farm, Orchard Close, erection of 14 dwellings, reserved matter application. Would anybody like to move that? Thank you. And second? Thank you very much. Would anyone like to open the debate on this item? Councillor Paling.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have any concerns about the development, except for the rainfall that we've just had. And I'm very mindful of the flooding that's just happened in London and the Dusseldorf floods. Have we got enough to prevent real dangerous slippage on this site? It is a steep site. And it's just a question. I know that some things are being put in place, but will they withstand the downpours we're having currently?
Yeah, I think it says on page 53 that it had been future-proofed for 100 years plus 40% storm, which, you know, sounds pretty secure. I mean, probably nobody will be, we won't be here in 100 years, will we? So it sounds it's pretty well future-proofed. Sorry, anybody else like to speak on this? Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst out canvassing during the county council elections in May, we actually went along Olive Grove, I think it's called, isn't it? The road there. Sorry, apologies for those from the area. It's not an area that I'm overly familiar with. And the issue of this development was raised by one of the residents. And we did have a bit of a discussion, and I gave you my word. I would go away and have a look at it, because at that point I wasn't familiar with the application at all. The residents' concerns were specifically in terms of the drainage in relation to his own property. So, true to my word, I have looked at the application. I have raised it with the officers briefly, and I am satisfied that sufficient provision has been put in place to protect the existing properties, and therefore I am minded to support this application.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. Apart from the paragraph that you read out part of on page 53, there is on the bottom of page 49, 7.12, which talks about the strategy and the conditions on drainage, and that the applicant has supplied additional information which indicates the retaining walls will have land drains behind them to stop surface water draining onto third-party land. So I think that has been thoroughly addressed, and has already been said, the principle of development here has already been approved. As Mr. Bryan said, some details with regard to reserved matters will be given to the department before any building takes place. So I'm content to approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to contribute to the debate? Councillor Elwood.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the size of the development. It's got, is it 0.7 of a hectare? And I'm just wondering, with regard to the affordable housing issue, I may be missing something here, but on page 46 is referring to residential density, and that's 30 dwellings per hectare. So if I do my sort of O-level maths, half a hectare would be 15 dwellings. So if we've got 0.7 of a hectare, does that make it more than 15 dwellings? In which case, shouldn't we be having at least one affordable property on the development? Thank you.
The density would be below 30 per hectare, so it's actually slightly lower than we would perhaps normally expect, but it is towards the edge of settlement and where the densities are typically lower, and the actual site was allocated for 15 within the local plan, and also when the outline was granted permission was for up to 15 dwellings. That would normally trigger the threshold to meet affordable housing, but the application that's come in before is for 14, therefore it doesn't meet that threshold, so rightly or wrongly we're in no position to request affordable housing on this site.
But shouldn't the density be more than that? That's what. Shouldn't it be more than 14 according to the LPD 33?
It is slightly below that, but I think, as I say, we've got to really assess it as to whether or not that density is appropriate given its edge of settlement location, also the fact that it was allocated for 15 units, and the fact that it's gone down to 14, would that be enough to realistically justify a refusal of permission, or perhaps be inclined to say not in this instance?
So just to comment again in relation to affordable housing, our affordable housing policy, that is only engaged at 15 or more dwellings. This is 14 dwellings, and therefore affordable housing isn't required. In terms of the overall area of the site, it should be noted that not all of the site is developed. So there are areas of open space actually on the site, so that the site isn't entirely built up. But in terms of the character of the area, what we've needed to do is look at, is this in keeping with the character of the area in terms of the density, And in our view, this minor reduction in the number of dwellings, so a reduction in one, is still in keeping with the density of the area. And it should be noted that the outline planning permission, it was for up to 15, so 14 is considered to be in full conformity with the requirements of the outline planning permission.
Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just an additional point to what Councillor Elwood mentions. You know, when we're putting in documents for, and we're saying recommendations, and should we not be quoting that we're in contravention of policy in that circumstance and list that? I might be missing something, but I can't see where it says we're in contravention of a policy, specifically in a number of policies. I would agree with Councillor Elwood on density, although I'm happy with the numbers. LPD 35, safe, accessible and inclusive development. The steepness of this site, specifically in areas of winter, and if you have been into areas that are close to rural, they tend to get colder and you tend to get a lot more ice on the street, specifically because the way that the tree cover can cause the roads to ice over more. The density of green as well that can do that. But also the issue, LPD 32 as well, which talks, sorry, these are all on page 46, if everyone's wondering where I'm rambling on about. Talking about the actual amenity and the visual amenity and should not have an adverse impact on amenity of nearby residents and occupiers. Again, if you've been to the site, as you can probably see from the site, it's a very prominent site in Burton Joyce. Prominent in the sense that you can see it from, well, pretty much most of Main Street, I would say, up to the local Woodview garage. It's a green spot, a green field, if you like, in the middle of a group of trees. But I know that all the residents that back onto that would disagree that it doesn't affect their amenity in LPD 32. So yeah, just a first question on that, whether we should be writing in the recommendations that we are in contravention of policy, or is that based on an opinion rather than on an actual, should we not be mentioning that somewhere for noting purposes, if nothing else?
So you've raised a few points there, Councillor Adams. So first and foremost, in relation to the principle of development, as you're aware, this site was allocated in the local planning document. So it's a residential allocation for approximately 15 dwellings. An outline permission has been granted for 15 dwellings on the site. So the principle of development has already been established, both at the plan making stage and also at the point when outline planning permission was granted. So issues around principle have already been dealt with. This is an application for the consideration of reserve matters relating to appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. And what the officer report does, it considers the details which have been submitted pursuant to the outline planning permission, and in the opinion of officers, we have compliance with the policies in that regard. So it is subjective in terms of, so you referred to policy LPD 32, amenity, planning permission will be granted for proposals do not have a significant adverse impact on the amenity of nearby residents or occupiers. So that was considered at the outline planning application stage, and what Mr. Bryan has done in this report is he's considered the reserve matters of appearance, landscaping, layout and scale, and in this report he doesn't find any conflict with the policies which are listed. And if we did find conflict with the policies which are listed, then there would be that would be further considered in the report.
Can I come back, Chairman?
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Avery, for confirming that. I just want to also raise a couple of other issues. If we can just go back to the layout plan again. the biggest concern for me on this whole layout plan is the arm to the right. What's the reason for that arm to the right to be looking like it's... I mean, the arm to the top does sort of stop at the actual application field, you know, sort of the outline of the area, you can see that. To the right, what's the point of that arm? What is that being left open for future development? What's the idea there? Because that's obviously greenbelt land right next to it. What's the reason for that? Have we had any word from the developers as to what their thinking is?
I guess in short, the answer is no. I don't really know what the intention of that is. If they've left it open for future development, that's, you know, at the moment it's greenbelt land. The land that surrounds the application site is entirely greenbelt. So if an application were to come forward in the short term, there's a high probability it would be refused. But why they've left that there, really only the applicant could answer that question, I'm afraid.
So I could be a little stronger that if we did receive an application for the development of that adjoining land at the current time, that would be refused permission because, well, the officer recommendation, Councillor Adams, would be to recommend refusal because it would be located within the green belt. So the only vehicle, the only mechanism to remove green belt land from the green belt is through the plan making process. So this would need, for that the development of that adjoining land that you're referring to come forward, that would have to be allocated in a development plan going forward, which would be subject to full public consultation and a local inquiry for the plan to be adopted. And then it would also be subject to a separate planning permission as well. So what the reassurance that I can give is that at the current time, if an application came forward, it couldn't be supported by officers, and you know, the community will be fully engaged in any proposals which could come forward to allocate that land as part of the plan making process going forward. So in terms of the plan making process, you know, currently we're reviewing the aligned core strategy with partner authorities. So that will concentrate on the larger strategic sites. So any smaller sites that could come forward, for example, within Burton Joyce, they will be dealt with under the Part 2 local plan, which is some way off at the current time.
Okay, Councillor Adams.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I really appreciate you giving me such an opportunity to raise the points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Paling.
Thank you for letting me comment again, Chair. My concern, following Councillor Elwood's comments, is that seems to be within that large plot a space for the 15th house. And had it been put in the planning, we would have had that necessary number. Were an application to come in that top, at the top of the left-hand cul-de-sac, which to me looks as though there is space there, thank you. Would that count as a 15th house, or would it be a separate application?
That land is, the light green stuff here and there is the public open space. If they were to come in for something to build a dwelling on the public open space, realistically be refused, yeah.
So in terms of the outline planning permission that was granted, there's a requirement for public open space to be provided on the site. And there's a percentage, isn't there, from what I understand, so that's 10%. So these plans are in full conformity with the outline permission, which requires a 10% of the site to be public open space.
Thank you.
Councillor Hope.
Well, it's really, I'll rephrase Councillor Paling's question. If another house was built on the site, would the previous 14 be taken into account and it be required to be an affordable house?
Okay, so I'll come in again. So if it was a standalone planning application that was submitted for a 15th dwelling on there, we couldn't require that. If it was a separate planning application that was submitted not pursuant to the outline application, so it came as a fresh application, it couldn't be considered as a 15th property, but for the reasons that Mr. Bryan and I have just outlined, that there's a requirement to provide on-site open space. So there's a policy in the local planning document that is requiring a percentage of the wider site to be public open space, and there's also reference in relation to the actual allocation as well. I think there will be grounds for reasonably refusing planning permission. So we would still have control over that. That's a reassurance that I'd want to give to members.
Councillor Barnes.
Can I just congratulate the planners, because I think they've had a very difficult job with this, and they've come out with a very, very sensible and realistic proposition with these plans. I think they've done a tremendous job, and I think they need to be applauded what they've come up with, because it's not easy in them sort of areas, but I think they've done this tremendous job, and I think they need congratulating. Thank you.
Councillor Adams, do you genuinely want to come back with something
Yes,
new?
if you don't mind. Sorry, I've just had a final moment. I promise you this is the very, very last point. The issue that one of my biggest concerns across the board in the Burton Joyce area is the water, surface water runoff. As we can see from the design, we're taking what is a very green, absorbent sponge of an area as far as the green is concerned, and covering a significant amount of it with concrete. The point in the report that states that the drainage will feed into the existing drainage systems. Now, so 2 roads down from there, there's a road called Langham Drive. Langham Drive gets a similar runoff off a similar pitch of the same hill. When it goes into Langham Drive, it builds up around the front walls of the residents that live there, and it eventually removes itself via people's gardens and ends up shooting out of a pipe onto Main Street. But during that time, these drives get full of water. And the hill, in relation to the one we're talking about now, is significantly smaller. So currently, we're in a situation where the drainage systems that we have in play right now can't deal with the volume of water. So what I want to understand is what assessment has been done to determine if the actual existing systems can deal with this level of water, regardless of the tanks that are going to be installed, because we have these same tanks on Langham Drive, and they can't deal with it. So I suppose what I'm trying to understand is what assessment's been done and by whom to determine the capacity of these drains and if they can actually take the volume of water that will be now thundering down that street. Thank you.
I'm not aware of any assessments that have been done per se, but I know that the Lead Flood Authority are in effect the key body that would manage the surface water. So in effect, the storage of the water will be under the green space in the bottom furthest right hand side, and it's proposed to drain out at a rate of 5 litres per second. In effect, we will be guided by the Lead Flood Authority as to whether that level is acceptable in the capacity of the existing network. But based on what we've been indicated so far from the Lead Flood Authority, they're content that a rate of 5 litres per second would be acceptable and the existing network can accommodate it.
So just adding some further clarification, Councillor Adams, is a condition on the outline planning permission. And we require full drainage details to be submitted. And those details would be discharged in consultation with the lead local flood authority. So they will be specifically consulted on the details which are submitted pursuant to condition 5 of the outline planning permission. So we would seek that reassurance that the details that we are minded to discharge when they're presented to us are acceptable. It's incumbent upon us to take the necessary technical advice before signing off those details.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Adams. I do appreciate your concerns as it's your patch, so to speak. Anyone else have a contribution to make towards this debate, or are you content that I move to the vote? Okay, we have the application on page 42, 2021/0301, Hillside Farm, Orchard Close, erection of 14 dwellings, a reserved matters approval. and you have the recommendation on page 50 of your agenda papers to grant reserve matters approval subject to the imposition of the conditions set out in the report. Can I see all those in favour of that application, please show. And against? Sorry, only members of the committee can vote. So you can put your hands down there. And abstentions. Okay, Kate, is that everyone? Thank you very much. That application has been approved. Right, we move on to application 2021/0289, which is 95 Arno Hill Road, Arnold, which you'll find on page 56 of your agenda papers. Proposed apartment building for 10 apartments, including the demolition of an existing building and garage. And I'll ask Mike Avery, the Head of Development and Place, to elaborate on this application for you.
Thank you, Chairman. Full planning permission is sought for the erection of 10 one-bedroom apartments following the demolition of the existing dwelling and garage. 22 representations have been received, raising objection to the development on amenity, highway, design and other grounds. A summary of the objections is provided in your report. The site is situated within an established built-up residential area in Arnold, which is well served by public transport and close to Arnold Town Centre. The principle of redeveloping the site for residential purposes is therefore considered to be acceptable. Significant concern is, however, raised in the officer report in relation to the impact upon the character and appearance of the area and residential amenity. The proposal will be substantially larger than the existing building and will be higher than the adjoining properties on Arnott Hill Road, and the building height, scale and massing difference will be significant, particularly when compared to the single-storey properties situated on Conway Gardens. I also consider that the design and appearance of the building, in terms of the varying eaves heights and the gable designs, would appear incongruous within the street scene. The proposed building will be set immediately adjacent with number 97 Arnott Hill Road and will present a 6.4 metre high blank brick wall running alongside the boundary for a depth of approximately 9 metres beyond the existing rear elevation of the adjacent property. It is considered that this would appear dominant and would result in an overbearing and overshadowing impact on the ground floor windows and the private amenity area currently enjoyed by the occupiers of this neighbouring property. There would also be some indirect overlooking impact from the windows proposed in the rear elevation of this apartment building. While I note that concern has been expressed by local residents in relation to car parking and the access and egress arrangements, no objection has been received from the Highways Authority. Chairman, it's recommended that the application is refused in accordance with the officer report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. So there we have the, on page 56, application number 2021/0289, 95 Arno Hill Road, proposed apartment building for 10 apartments, including demolition of existing buildings. Would anybody like to move that? Thank you. And second? Thank you. Would anybody like to open the debate on this item? Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chair, and I welcome the conclusion of this report. I think it sets out the circumstance of this particular development well. It's incongruous on the street scene, and it would damage the residential amenity of existing residents. So I'm quite happy to go along with the refusal. But yet again, I'm surprised that highways are quite so laissez-faire about some of this. I mean, Conway Gardens, I think, is a very difficult road. So I'm surprised they've nothing to say about that. But I think there's plenty of evidence that they ought to refuse it, and I'm happy to go along with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Would anybody else like to add to the debate here? Sorry, sir. This is a planning committee, and the members of the public are here as observers, not contributors. Anybody from the planning committee wish to speak, or are you content that I move to the vote? Okay, what we have is the page 56, application 2021/0289, 95 Arno Hill Road, Arnold, proposed apartment building for 10 apartments. And we have the recommendation of the Borough Council on page 63 that this application is refused permission on the grounds listed on page 63 and 64. So remember, if you are voting in favour of this, you're voting in favour of a refusal. Can I see all those in favour, please show. And against and abstentions, that is passed. That application has been refused. Now, thank you very much. If you can move on to item 7, application number 2021/0542, 19 Ash Close, Arnold, which you'll find on page 66 of your agenda papers. And I'd like Mike Avery to introduce and elaborate on this item for us, please. Sorry. I apologise, sorry. We do have a speaker on this item. I'm very sorry about that. I haven't been paying sufficient attention. We have Rhys Farnsworth, who is the applicant. My apologies.
Good evening, everyone. My husband and I are the owners of 19 Ash Close and have owned the property since 2018. The application site sits to the side and rear of our back garden and adjacent to a footpath link through to Dalton Drive. The site is owned by Gedling Borough Council, hence coming to the Planning Committee tonight. It's a leftover parcel of incidental open space that the Parks Department do not wish to maintain and have been willing to sell for several years. Apart from the footpath through, the site is enclosed on all sides by rear garden fences and retaining walls, including our own, many of which are in a poor state of repair. The site is currently an eyesore and, as an unsupervised space, is a location for antisocial gatherings, vandalism and littering. The site is recorded within the Council's own documentation as being surplus to requirements, having low amenity value and being subject to high levels of antisocial behaviour. Back in 2009, planning permission was granted for 2 split-level dwellings on this site. We also previously withdrew an application in 2020 for a dwelling which might rightly have been considered to be too large, too prominent, and give rise to an overbearing impact on neighbours. So after further conversations with the case officer and a redesign, this current proposal goes back to the principles of the 2009 approval in terms of its siting, massing, and the location of its windows. It has, as agreed in pre-application discussions with the case officer, no material impact on any of its neighbours. As a low-rise bungalow-style dwelling dug into the site, it is not visible from any surrounding vantage point except the footpath from Ash Close through to Dalton Drive. It may be correct that the siting of a dwelling here does not follow the immediate regular layout form, but that is not necessarily a reason to refuse an application in this typical housing estate location, where the dwelling will barely be visible in the street scene and will not adversely impact upon its neighbours. Its development would improve a poorly maintained space, relieve a long-standing maintenance burden for the Borough Council, and remove a known refuge for antisocial behaviour. It will also provide a modest capital receipt for the council to direct to well-used open spaces in the local area. This site will continue to be a problem unless some positive action is taken, so we please ask that you approve this application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I'll ask Mike again, sorry about that, to elaborate on this application.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is a resubmission of a scheme withdrawn in December 2020. Full permission is again sought for the erection of a single split-level 4-bedroom dwelling with a double garage. Vehicular access will be via Ash Close, taken from a section of what is currently part of the curtilage of number 19 Ash Close, and will be created by virtue of the relocation of the detached garage currently serving this property. 3 representations have been received, and these are detailed in the officer report. The application site is currently public open space, which suffers from antisocial behaviour and is considered by the Parks and Street Care team to have low amenity value and is surplus to the council's requirements. I'm mindful of the previous permissions for residential development in 2009. However, although the site characteristics may not have changed significantly since that time, there's been an updated national planning policy framework, the Aligned Core strategy adopted in 2014, and the local planning document adopted in 2018. Notwithstanding the planning history of the site, the proposal has been assessed on its own merits and against current national and local planning policies. These policies now have a much greater emphasis on design, including scale and layout. I'm of the view that the proposal now before the council would result in a form of backland development that would appear entirely incongruous, out of character and harmful to the setting of the site and the prevailing urban pattern of development within its vicinity, together with the wider setting. It is accepted that the proposal would make a contribution to housing supply in the borough, should permission be granted. However, this would be modest and would not be outweighed by the mentioned concerns. The impact upon neighbour amenity, highway safety and rights of way have been assessed in the officer report, and no harm has been identified in these regards. Chairman, I recommend that permission is refused in accordance with the officer report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. So, the proposal we have on page 66, application number 2021/0542, 19 Ash Close, Arnold, is to erect a detached dwelling. Would somebody like to move that application? And second? Thank you. Would anybody like to open the debate on this one? Anybody? Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep it brief. I am minded to support the officer recommendation. We've been quite firm about backland development, and this does appear to be a form of backland development and therefore inappropriate, so I'll be supporting the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I was going to say exactly the same thing. It is obviously a strange one, and on the face of it, one could think it would be an advantage for the borough to sell this land if they're not maintaining it. But at the end of the day, it's not the ownership of the land. We all know that anybody can put a planning application on land that they don't own. I just hope that the department looks at this again. It's not a planning consideration, but it does seem pretty bad that one of our departments has, well, on the face of it, abandoned a piece of land which is causing the problems that have been detailed by the applicant. So I'm quite content to vote that the application is refused.
Thank you, Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I just want to understand, please, Mr. Avery, the difference between backland and garden land, just for the point and what the difference is in the points of development. I find this a real unusual one because I do understand where you're coming from a perspective of what the other houses are in the area, but then I'm also of the opinion that if this benefits all parties, there's no overlooking, there's no issues with runoff, there's no issues with the neighbours, people aren't going to be negatively affected by this development, then, you know, the reasons to refuse it, therefore, I find hard to surmount. If we don't want to do anything with it anymore, you know, fine. But the knock-on effect for those people around that area, as a result of us not wanting to maintain it and it becoming an area of, you know, the applicants described as antisocial behaviour and a problem area for the area, then surely our responsibility as a council is to enhance an area. And if we can help deliver a property within that area to effectively stop a problem that's in existence and also provide home ownership for a family or whoever, then surely we should be minded to do that. I find this a really difficult one to understand the refusal. And maybe if I can understand what the backland and garden land issue is, and it's not just we're not just doing it for policy's sake, but actually looking at this as an individual application and determining if that, you know, this particular site with its particular issues, we shouldn't be looking at that in its own merits. You know, I think that's probably, yeah, I think that's sort of where I'm coming from. I hope that makes some sort of sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. So in terms of backland development, what we're talking about is a relationship of the piece of land to the existing settlement and the street. So this doesn't have any direct street frontage. In this particular case, it's not garden land, it's an incidental area of public open space which is maintained by the council. It's owned by the council, and it ought to be properly maintained by the site owner, which in this instance is the Borough Council. So it's about the relationship of the parcel of land to the adjoining properties and the street scene. So if you look at the settlement pattern there, I think it's very important. If you look at how the existing properties in that particular locality relate to the highway, we have frontages of properties fronting onto an adopted public highway, and that is the character of the area. What we would have in this instance would be a very narrow driveway down the side of 19 Ash Close, which will provide a narrow access to a very enclosed piece of land situated to the rear of existing properties, which, in my view, in the view of the case officer, is at variance with the character of the area. Each application is considered on its own merits. So another member said earlier on that we take, in terms of applying our policies, we've taken quite a strict line, quite a hard line in terms of looking at the character of an area, and I think that's very important now. So as I'd said in the presentation, and as detailed in the officer report, there's now a much greater emphasis of our, having regard to the policies which have been adopted since 2009, on actually looking at the character of the area. So I think that's incredibly important. So there are instances where garden land, it can be acceptable for residential development. So, a lot of planning permissions that are actually granted, they are granted on areas of garden land. But those areas normally have direct street frontage. They're the applications that we support. Or they're much larger sites where it's possible to create a new street scene through, for example, the creation of a cul-de-sac with multiple properties on it. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Adams.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else like to contribute towards this debate? You're quite content that we move to the vote on it. So, application number 2021/0542, 19 Ash Close, Arnold, erect a detached dwelling. The recommendation you will find on page 74 of your agenda papers, which is to refuse planning permission. So remember once again, if you're voting in favour of this, you're voting to refuse planning permission. So can I see all those in favour of the officer's recommendation, please show. And again, stand abstentions. Thank you. That is carried and the application has been refused. Okay, if we can move on now to agenda item number 8, application number 2021/0200, land south of Colic Loop Road, which you'll find on page, goodness me, 78 of your agenda papers. Which is a Section 73 application for amendments to a previous planning permission, which I'll allow Nigel Bryan to explain all to you in greater detail.
Thank you, Chair. The application site is centred in the red line here. It's an application made under Section 73 of the Town and Country Planning Act, whereby the proposal is to make changes to the drawings as previously approved under Permission 2020-0237. The full list of changes proposed are outlined on pages 80 and 81 of the report. However, the main change is considered to be the removal of the Argos warehouse to the rear of the store, which all of the changes which are considered to be back of house. The actual elevation treatments, as you see before you, are largely the same as previously proposed, and this highlights the key changes. The drawing on the left shows the large kind of storage area for the Argos, and that, as you can see on the drawing on the right, is now proposed to be removed. Other changes really are relatively minor. I think there's 8 parking spaces are being omitted, and then the other changes outlined on pages 80 to 81. Development has commenced on site, and they're implementing the previously approved permission, and a number of conditions are proposed to alter to reflect this. However, the overall changes are considered to be minor materially in form, and they are primarily reflected in changes to the rear of the store. Based on this key fact, the changes are considered to be acceptable, and we're recommending approval, subject to the conditions as outlined on pages 85 to 91 of the committee report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So that is application 2021/0200, land south of Colic Loop Road. Would anybody like to move that application? And second, thank you. Anybody like to open the debate on this? Nope. You're all content that we move to the vote. Okay. The proposal, Section 73 application, and the recommendation is that the application be granted permission subject to the conditions outlined below. Can I see all those in favour, please show. And again, stand abstentions, that has been approved. Okay, if we can move on to item 9 on the agenda, which is a tree planning order, Newstead Abbey Park, Newstead, which you'll find on page 93 of your agenda papers, and Mike Avery is going to explain this one further.
Thank you, Chairman. The Council has received a number of complaints from local residents about unauthorised works to trees within the Newstead Abbey Park. The existing TPOs are historic, having first been made in 1976 and 1977 respectively. These complaints were investigated and the arborist considered that it would be justified to increase the extent of the TPO to incorporate a new section of woodland to the west of the historic orders. The provisional TPO was made under the emergency provisions contained within the Constitution in February of this year. Interested parties were consulted and 3 separate representations were received prior to the publication of the report. Following the publication of the report, a further representation has been received. The only new issue raised, which is not covered in the report, is that a significant number of trees are not visible from the public realm. In response to this additional issue raised, I would advise that some of the trees are not visible from within the public realm. However, they do still contribute to the wider setting and amenity of the woodland which the TPO is seeking to protect. The representations received do not raise any issues which would indicate that the TPO should not now be confirmed. Chairman, it's recommended that the TPO is confirmed and the historic orders are revoked in accordance with the report. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Would anybody like to move that TPO? And second, would anybody like to open the debate on it? Yes, Councillor Barnfather.
Yeah, thank you. I just wonder if Mr. Avery could just give me some clarification. The TPO that we're being asked to sign off on today, I'm assuming incorporates both public realm aspects of the park, which are owned and managed by Nottingham City Council, and presumably private elements of dwellings which exist within the greater park area. So the TPO would cover both elements. It's a little bit obscure in the documentation that we have. Do the complaints that have been made pertain to unnecessary or unlawful removal of woodland within private dwellings or within the greater park area owned and managed by Nottingham City Council?
Thank you, Councillor Barnfather. So the extents of the revised TPO are detailed on the plan on the screen. I appreciate that's not particularly clear, but at page 102 of the agenda pack, there is a detailed plan at a scale of approximately 1 to 5,000. That shows the extent of the TPO. It does include parkland. It does include private residential properties. So the curtilages of those residential properties are detailed on the plan, which is included in the agenda pack. In terms of the complaints that the council has received, they relate to the removal of trees within private garden areas and not removal of trees which are contained in the city land, which comprises the Newstead Abbey Park.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Avery. That's very obviously it's in my patch, so that's very reassuring. It's obviously well used by residents from my area. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? Yes, Councillor Barnes.
Can I ask the officers if we've had any recent complaints about what's been going on in the park during this hot weather? Because I've had one or two people contact me saying things have been a bit raw. People's been using the lake to swim in, and people's been. From that point of view, because I've been told that there has been some activity taking place in the park.
Yeah, I'm afraid.
So the actual park is managed. A lot of the land within the park is owned by Nottingham City Council. So yeah, I would concur with Councillor Truscott. Not specifically a planning matter, but I can't comment on whether or not Nottingham City Council have received complaints in relation to the use of the park, or even the Borough Council. So I don't have that information.
Anything further? We move straight to the vote. Thank you very much. You'll recommendation on page 98 to confirm the TPO 00141 Euston Abbey Park without modifications and revoke the two previous TPOs mentioned. Can I see all those in favour, please vote? Thank you. And against and abstentions, that is carried. Okay, thank you very much. Next, we come to an appeal decision, 17 Greaves Close, Arnold, on page 103. No comments? Any comments on that one? No. Agenda item 11, Linby House, Linby Lane, Linby, for detached single-storey dwellings. Nope. Okay. Future applications on page 109. Any questions or queries? Nope. Planning Delegation Panel Action Sheets, page 111 to page 126. Anybody have any questions or queries? Nope. Okay. Any other items the Chair considers urgent? I don't have any other items, urgent or otherwise. And I'd just like to say thank you all very much for turning up to tonight's meeting. And after a brief absence, I'd just like to say how pleased I am and how happy I am to see all your pleasant smiling faces again. And there's no planning committee in August, so it'll be September before this merry gathering meets again. Thank you all and have a safe journey home.